Yes, as if once wasn't enough. Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple of quick questions, and then we're going to move right into where we were. So if you recall yesterday, I asked you to write down a question or questions, and then to not think about them. So number one, how many people were able to not think about the question for the entire 24 hours? One, two, oh, that's pretty good. And in that, and how many people found themselves thinking about the question, kind of when they were doing something, like either taking a shower or doing something else? All right, okay, so it did pop up. And did an answer come up necessarily, or did the question come up and maybe like the fear of, gee, I wonder if I'm going to have an answer, or that kind of thing? Was there anxiety about the question? Ah, okay, so somebody else's presentation triggered your thinking about the question. Okay. So I assume nobody had a problem with their question. That is to say, they didn't find it like really troubling them in some way, right? Okay, so let's do this. I want you to close your eyes for a second. Literally, this is only going to take a second. And I want you to now say to your subconscious, what do you have for me in terms of an answer? And if you don't already have the question in front of you, I want you to find it wherever you wrote it, and I want you to start writing. Doesn't matter what you write, just start writing. You can write gibberish, you can write the nines tables. Just start writing and see within the next couple of minutes what, if anything, comes up with regard to the questions you asked. And if you find that it doesn't continue to flow, just go back to writing. Write anything. Write Mary Had a Little Lamb, write Once Upon a Time, write a birthday card. The act of writing itself is sort of important to keeping that flow from the inside going. So first question I have, did anybody get absolutely nothing? Nobody got nothing, okay? Did anybody, so presumably everybody got something, okay? Did anybody get the answer they kind of expected to get? That is to say, the answer that they had already thought about a little bit, and it sounded pretty much like what they've been thinking about. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did anybody get something that they hadn't thought of before? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so any feedback from you to me? So roughly half the people, of the 15 or so people who raised their hands, about 5 said, well, the stuff that came up was something that had already been kind of cooking and I was familiar with it. About twice as many said something came up that I hadn't thought of before. Number one, of the people whose stuff that came up that was familiar, was there anything new or different about this time? Or was it pretty much the answer you had when you asked the question? Do you understand what I'm getting at? Does that make sense? Same answer. Okay. You thought of something really good that you'd never thought of before. Okay, and were you surprised when that came up? Okay. Yeah, Raymond.
I thought I had the answer, but I came back with a little bit more conviction in my answer.
Ah, okay. So it seems stronger for some reason, after having sort of been incubated, as it were, overnight. Yes?
I had the same thing, more confirmation.
More confirmation. Oh, so it felt a little different even though the information was sort of the same. Fair enough. Please.
It's the question that was hard to answer. So in a way, I just feel that I don't have an answer to it, but I'm working hard at it.
Uh-huh.
So it's affecting me.
So did it feel like this process brought anything to finding that answer?
It's still created the fog.
Say again?
It's created the fog.
It created the fog.
Because I asked such a difficult question. So,
Okay. So this was, I don't want to get into too much personal detail if you don't want to share, but this was a pretty fundamental question as far as you were concerned. Okay, and so now at least you found the fog in which the question sort of resides. Okay. Okay. Any other feedback in terms of, yes, Thomas?
Yeah, I was trying to find, I was looking for something in my story that has to do with something that already exists in a physical form. I was looking for something in my story that already exists in a physical form and is well known to everybody, basically the Great Pyramid. And I wanted somebody to come out of that, and I happened to study it enough that knowing that the entrance is 53 feet above ground at the time of my story. All of that was, he had to come from an impossible place. And what came through with this process was, that's the answer.
Okay. Anybody else want to share? I can't see you real well, so Mark?
yeah, I think I managed to get another dimension.
I managed to get another dimension to the answer that I was.
So it added a level to it.
Yeah, it's something I wasn't aware of before. So.
Ah, well, there you go. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
So I had what type of work will keep me engaged and happy. And what's interesting, when I started writing sun, moon, and stars, which I think is interesting because we talked about this earlier. I haven't been getting out of the house enough. And I think that I can't figure out what type of work is going to keep me engaged and happy until I get out more. So it was like the precursor to the answer that
Right.
I'm looking for. So it didn't give me the answer, but I think it gave me the first step to get there.
Right, and the nature of this process is you can ask the same question again and again, and each time what's going to happen is, okay, so it kind of came back to you with a question which is, all right, you want to get out of the house, okay, is it morning, noon, or night that you want to get out of the house, okay, and what should you be focusing on? Well, you know, sun, moon, and stars are kind of celestial things, so maybe you want to study astronomy. I don't know. Ken?
Yeah, my question had multiple possible answers. So, and the answer that came was one I've thought of.
Mm-hmm.
It just had an added dimension to it. I was
Okay.
trying to find the best way to be represented in the intellectual property area, and the word that came this time that wasn't there before was whoever it is had to have enthusiasm for the product.
Ah, okay. So what I think, then keep in mind, this is the first time most of you have done this, at least in this form, okay? So if you got anything, I think this is great. You notice that nobody got nothing, all right? Because your subconscious wants to respond to you. It's yours, it's there to help you, it has no interest in fighting you whatsoever, okay? And now you at least have the framework. So we essentially used sort of activity and sleep as the incubating activity for this one. But obviously, as we discussed yesterday, you don't necessarily have to go to sleep. You certainly can. A number of people have come up to me since I talked yesterday and said, you know, I have this practice where I write things down, either things that I'm grateful for or questions that I have or both before I go to sleep. And then I wake up in the morning and kind of, you know, look at those I appreciate the things I said I was grateful for, I recognize them again, and then answers start to come to me. So many of you in one form or another, I think, already have this process kind of built in or already using some form of this process, and perhaps all I've done is articulated it in a way or offered you a kind of structure to it that allows you to not necessarily only do it when you go to sleep at night, or the answers can only come in the morning. The truth is, you can structure this process in and around your day as much as you want and as many times as you want. So for me, creative writing, I'm up against a horrific deadline. I can do this 5, 6, 7 times in the course of a day. What's the next section of the piece? What's the next scene I have to write? Whatever it happens to be, the answer is you can just create this dialogue with your subconscious, and the more you practice this, like anything else that you've seen here, the more fluid and nimble it becomes. So now I get to the point where I ask myself a question and I go to work on a model or I go to cook something, and literally 10 minutes later, I haven't even gotten the sauce done and the answer comes up and I go, really, could you wait please? Because, you know, I'm like, I want to finish the sauce. And it says, well, you asked the question, you know, and here's the answer. It didn't take that long. It's yours. Write it down, do whatever you want with it. Does anybody, since they only gave me just a few minutes here, and that's all I think we really needed, does anybody have any additional questions? So there are a lot of, you know, sort of tricks and things which will obviously be in the book that we hope to have out in the next couple of months, and subtleties to this, but you basically now have the fundamental premise and the principal methodology. So before I leave, if anybody has a question, I'm happy to answer that, and if not, you can certainly see me afterwards. Yes, Ken?
Just one additional thing. I had a client who, you remember Mason, I had a client, Mason Williams, and he did this and ended up with a whole career as a result. And it's an adjunct of what you're talking about that I can recommend, which is that every time he saw something, anything that interested him or ideas or stuff that came to him this way, when he necessarily hadn't specifically asked the question, he wrote it down. He kept a notebook. Now it's much easier to do on a computer. And for years he had these huge notebooks he carried around, and then he eventually turned all of that into unbelievable creativity because he went back through all of these things that had hit him along the way. So there is kind of a ancillary piece to this, or a subset to it.
Yes, the difficulty I have with this process now is that so much amazing stuff comes up, and I put it down that I have a lifetime's worth of projects ahead of me, and unfortunately I'm not sure I have another whole lifetime in which to accomplish them, but you know, that's what we call a high-class problem. Did anybody else have a question? Yes? Well, what happens when you get an answer you don't like? Okay, then I think the next question is, why don't I like this answer, and why am I getting this answer if it's not something that resonates with me? Okay, it's rare that you get an answer you don't like, but sometimes it comes in the form, because what happens is if you ask a question and you get an answer you don't like, it usually has to do with the fact that it's putting you right up against the fear of your conscious mind. And then you go, oh, wait a minute. This is saying I have to do this, and I'm afraid of doing this. Okay, so now what am I going to do? And the answer is, okay, how do I either get past the fear or find something, or find an answer to that problem that doesn't involve one of my fears? So, yes, does somebody else have a question? No? We good?
Have you
Yeah.
written anything previously on this?
I have not written anything previously on this. This is, I mean, I've begun talking about it. We've done a series of workshops. The workshops were primarily to see, A, is it teachable? How long does it take to teach? You know, what kind of feedback do I get from the people who I'm trying to share this with? Because I've been doing this for myself for the better part of, you know, almost 4 decades. And so it's second nature to me. So if it's new to somebody, and a lot of wonderful feedback came back, which is to inform the book, obviously, which will be the first step of how you put this out there. And obviously there's the possibility of an app, and we're looking at online courses, you know, and expanding it out slowly but surely, but it's got to start somewhere. So, and Tony being Tony, I shared the very earliest kind of little baby shoot tendrils with him about this, and he said, great, why don't you come to Zappos and talk about it? And so it kind of got launched before it was completely ready to launch. I thank you very much. I hope this was worthwhile, and I look forward to hearing from you in the future.